Welcome to another video. I cannot believe the year is over. Like, that's insane. But this is going to be my 2024 wrapped. I'm going to talk about all the books I read and I'm going to give some stats. So I'm going to start with the stats and I'll put timestamps up if you want to skip this part. But in 2024, I read 31 physical books, 28 ebooks, 45 audiobooks, and 13 graphic novels / manga for a total of 118 books. So some more stats. I read 4 of the 12 2024 releases I was excited about at the beginning of the year. I read 11 of the 35 books I put on my TBR cart at the beginning of the year. 68 of those books I read free using the app Libby, so books from my local library, and 21 of those books were rereads, which is better than last year. So for my Goodreads wrapped thing, I only do my physical books and ebooks on Goodreads, so books that read with my eyes. So 59 of my 118 are on my Goodreads. So I read 2,898 pages with my eyes. The shortest book I read was a Shadow Me novella. The Shadow Me one was 69 pages. The longest book I read was Magnolia Park's A Long Way Home, which was 645 pages. My average book length was 354, and my average rating was 3.7. So I think that's it for stats. Now I'm going to talk about all the books I read. I'm going to list them in order that I read them in, unless I read a series, and then I'm going to lump all of those books in the series together, even if I read them different months. And I'm going to briefly say what I thought about the books. Very briefly. Some of them, I don't know if I remember what I thought about them, but I'm gonna do my best. The first book I finished of the year was called What If It's Us? And then I also read its sequel, Here's to Us. I thought these were cute YA coming of age rom-coms, but the second one had plot lines I didn't really agree with. The next book I read was A Good Bad Girl by Alice Feeney. Not my favorite of hers. It was not really a thriller at all. It was honestly more a story about family than anything else. Then I started reading the Shatter Me series, and I actually read all 11 books from January to December. So that is Shatter Me, Destroy Me, Unravel Me, Fracture Me, Ignite Me, Restore Me, Shadow Me, Defy Me, Reveal Me, Imagine Me, and Believe Me. This series is mid and went so far downhill. It was insane. I hated the last 2 books. So then I read 2 books in the Simon verse, which is the Simon versus the Homo Sapien Agenda series. Even though some of the later ones don't feel like they're related at all, it is technically all part of the Simon verse. And that is The Upside of Unrequited and Leah on the Offbeat. They're all right. I believe I liked Leah on the Offbeat the best of the series. But that was so long ago, I forgot I read them. Then I read the 3rd Enola Holmes book, which is The Case of the Bizarre Bouquets. And I stopped reading the series after this, not because I didn't like it, but because I didn't like listening to it. I just haven't picked it up any other way. I feel like I missed a lot of pieces of the story. So then Ruthless Vows came out. So I read this when it came out, but then later in the year, I did reread Divine Rivals, which was the first one. So I read both of these this year. And I love Divine Rivals. I reread it. This was one of my favorite books I read last year. I did not like the sequel as much, but I did enjoy seeing Iris and Roman again. But that was just kind of the best part, was just seeing the couple again. The rest of the story was just all right. Then I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I actually really liked this one. I feel like it was kind of slow, but overall I really liked it, and I do get the hype. Then I read The Martian, which is probably my biggest surprise of the year because I absolutely love this book. It was my first 5-star of the read. I love it so much. It was so great. It was so funny, heartfelt. It was everything. Then I reread the Cassandra Clare's Immortal Instruments trilogy, which is Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince, and Clockwork Princess. I don't absolutely love the plotline of this trilogy, but I do love the characters so much that I cry every time I read this series. I love Jim Carstairs so much. Then I read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This is her memoir. Very, very good, very eye-opening, but does cover some sensitive topics, so look up the trigger warnings prior to reading this book. Then I read Get Alive, Chloe Brown. I was kind of surprised that I didn't like this book more than I did. I thought it was cute and I really liked the representation, but the language in this book was very vulgar and it really took me out of what was happening in the scene. Then I reread A Court of Thorn and Roses via audiobook because I read this a couple years ago and I've been trying to get into the second book but just can't get into it because I just don't love this series, so I felt the same way when I reread it. Then I read Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This was her step into paranormal romance and it was something. I still love her writing, but this genre is not for me. Then I reread Cassandra Clare's Shadowhunter series. I don't remember the name of the series, but the books are Red Scrolls of Magic and The Lost Book of the White. Despite Magnus Bane being one of my favorite characters in this world, this series is my least favorite. The plotline is okay. Everything is just okay about it. Like, I like seeing the characters, but it's just okay. Then I read By a Thread by Lucy Score. This is my first Lucy Score book, and I think I like her writing, but it is like pretty long and a bit smuttier than I would like. So then I read Assassin's Blade. This was March, and then I just finished this week Throne of Glass. I read this one first. It is what it is. And I really like this series, and I'm very excited to continue it. I already have the next book to read. So then I reread Crazy Rich Asians via audiobook so that I could read China Rich Girlfriend, which I did read this one physically, but I thought I would hold up both of them together. Yeah, I really like this series. I think it's I don't know how to describe it. I like seeing into this culture and this world, both with, you know, Asian culture, but also rich culture, because I don't know anything about that. And there's just so many moving pieces because it follows so many different characters. It can be hard to follow, but overall, I really like this series. And I still really want to read the third one. So then I read Daisy Hates, and then later in the year, I read Magnolia Parks: A Long Way Home. So this is in the Magnolia Parks world. So you read the first Magnolia Parks book and then the first Daisy Hates, and then you read the second Magnolia Parks and then the second Daisy Hates. So these are the two I read this year. This world is so toxic, like so toxic, but it makes it so like you can't put it down. You like have to know what's gonna happen. So I liked Daisy Hates more than the first Magnolia Parks, but then I really enjoyed the second Magnolia Parks. Do with that what you will. Then I read Things You Save in a Fire. This is my second Catherine Sinner book, and I have found that I really like her writing, but after I'm really enjoyed the book while I'm reading it, but then after I read it, I kind of forget that I read it, and I kind of forget what I thought about it. But I do know that I really liked this book, and I like her writing, and I want to read more. That's all I can say about it, though. Then I reread the third and fourth Percy Jackson books, which is Titan's Curse and The Battle of the Labyrinth. I haven't read these since I was a little kid. Honestly, my mind was really wandering while I was reading them, so I couldn't even say what I thought about them this time around because I just was like, I don't know. It was going in one ear, out the other. Not because it's bad. I think just the time I was reading it was not a good time for me to be reading it. So I keep putting off reading the next one because I feel like I should reread those rereads again. Then I read Just for the Summer. I really, really love this book. This was so sweet. You know, Golden Retriever, he would if he wanted to. Just so beautiful. I loved this book so much. And then I listened to Imogen. Obviously, this is a YA coming of age romance, and I don't really remember much about it except for there was a big plotline in this book that I didn't like, and I feel like it was a big red flag and no one really did anything about it. Then I read One of Us Is Next. This is the sequel to One of Us Is Lying, which I liked the first one. The second one, I mean, I liked it, but like I've read some other books by this author and I kind of don't like her writing. Like I'm always underwhelmed by it, so I'm not sure if I'm going to read any more of her books. They're like okay, but then I just Then I read Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is her new release this year. I really liked it, but not as much as I liked Happy Place, but I could relate to a lot of the things that were happening in this book, so I did like that, but also I could relate to it too much. And if you know the premise of this book, do you want to be able to relate to that? So then I read Powerful, which is the novella after Powerless. And then later in the year, I read Reckless, which is the book 2. So this is 1.5. This is book 2. This is really cute, simple story. I liked being back in the world. There was nothing really special about it, but it was sweet. And then the ending was really, really sad. Reckless was not as good as Powerless, but I still really enjoyed being back with the couple. So like I ate it up, even though I could see the faults in it. I mean, look at my little romance tabs I did. And then I read Loud, Awake, and Lost, and this is one of the worst books I've read this year. And I know it's YA, but even when I was a teenager, I don't think I would have liked this one. Then I read books 3 and 4 in the Bridgerton series, which is An Offer from a Gentleman and Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. So this one's Benedict's story and this one's Colin's story. I love this series. I think I've rated all of them 4 stars because they're not like super great, but I'm like so into them. However, by the time I get to the end, I'm ready for it to be over, but then I'm ready to read the next one. And I have the next 2 ready to go. And then I read Princess in the Spotlight, which is a Princess Diaries book, and these are so too young for me. They're such like read them in elementary school books, but I needed like a filler audiobook. So it was something simple and sweet to get through, and it's like so surface level for an adult to read. But I think I would have liked it as a kid, maybe. And then I read Catacomb. This is the third book in a series I read years ago that I just wanted to finish to have said I finished it. And I felt the same as the other books. These really big letdowns. They look really fun. The premise seems fun, but they're just such letdowns. And then I listened to Same Time Next Summer. I think I liked the writing, but I just didn't like some of the plots in this book. Then I read Beach Read, which I liked, but I didn't love it as much as other people do. But I feel like I read it at a bad time in my life, so I think I need to reread it, and then maybe I'll see what other people see. And then I read Rise of Nine, which is the third book in the I Am Number 4 series, I think. I like this series, but I wish it gave me more than it did. Like, I want to see more of the relationships between the characters, and I feel like all it's giving is plot, and I want more, like, relationship building. Then I read The Statistical Probability of Love at First Sight, and I think I hated every moment of this book, but I actually remember absolutely nothing about it. And then I read Legend, Prodigy, and Champion, which is a dystopian trilogy, and I really liked the first one, and then it got like so political that I kind of lost interest. So then I reread a series that I read when I was in middle school out of nostalgia, which is Forgive My Fins, Fins Are Forever, and Just for Fins. It's a silly romance book that I can't tell you if it holds up because I just like read through it with nostalgia. I read them like this. I was loving it. They're not great, but they're so silly and it's just such a fun time. And then I read Butcher and Blackbird, which was an interesting experience. And sometimes I just think certain things about ice cream now. And if you've read the book, then you know what I mean. And then I read Check and Mate, which was Ali Hazelwood's first YA book. And I liked it, but there's just too much like unrealisticness about this book that I was kind of like, about it. But I will still continue reading everything she writes. And then I read Daisy Jones and the Six, which I've been putting off for years because it's outside of my comfort zone, but I absolutely loved it. I highly recommend you listen to it and hear the voice actors because it was phenomenal. And then I read Killjoy, which is a novella in the Good Girls Guide to Murder series, and I really loved being back with Pip and seeing her before what happens in the series. It was really, really fun. And then I read Love from A to Z, which I liked learning more about Islamic culture, but I don't know. I just didn't really like these two characters together as a couple, and I just didn't see their chemistry like at all, and it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Their romance, but I liked everything else about the book. And then I reread Queen of Air and Darkness, which is the third book in Cassandra Clare's Shadowhunters trilogy called The Dark Artifices. And so much happens in this book. It's wild and it's an emotional ride. And then I did my first reread of the Hunger Games trilogy of the year, which is Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay. And then I just did my second reread of that in December. So I read the trilogy twice this year, which is less than last year. Once again, I love it as always. Please read the series. And then I read the Jane Austen Book Club, which is also one of my least favorite books of the year. Nothing happened and I didn't care about anything in this book. And then I read All the Dangerous Things. This is my second book that I've read by this author, and I like her books, but they're nothing special. They're kind of like you read them, you enjoy them, and then you kind of forget about them. So I think I would read more of them, but like they're not my favorites. And then I read Done and Dusted, which was my first cowboy romance, and I really liked it. It made me like, it's not like I want to date a cowboy, but I want to live on a ranch and ride horses. Like that seems so fun. Like I wish I grew up like that. Like that sounds so cozy. But alas, that will never happen because I'm very allergic to horses. And then I read Project Hail Mary. This is by the same author as The Martian, and since I love that one so much, I wanted to read his other books, and I love this one even more. Don't know how that was possible. And then I read Summer Romance. This is the same author as Same Time Next Summer, which I said I had problems with that one. This one was like perfect. I loved every single thing about this book. It was so much more than a summer romance. This book had me crying, smiling, giggling. It had me feeling so many feelings and I loved it so much. And then I read Out on a Limb, and this book has such great representation. I love the couple together. I loved everything about this book. It was so, so sweet. I got my boyfriend to give me a physical copy for Christmas because I loved it so much. And then I read A Novel Love Story. This is the same author that wrote A 7-Year Slip, but this book was a very big letdown because it had a very fun premise and I feel like it just didn't really do anything with it. Like I cared about everything else in the book more than what was actually happening to the main characters. And then I read Keeping the Moon, which is a YA book written in 1999, and you can tell I was wasn't a big fan of it, and I get what the author was trying to do, and I feel like she didn't do a good job, and I just didn't really care for the book, but also nothing really happened. It was kind of boring. And then I read Tom Lake. The best part of this book was the fact that Meryl Streep narrated it, because she did a great job, but nothing really happened in this book, and I was kind of bored by it, and it was very anticlimactic. Then I read The Reappearance of Rachel Price, which is Holly Jackson's newest book, and I feel like I wasn't a huge fan the whole time, but then like when stuff started getting revealed, I like could not put it down. Overall, really loved it. And then I read The Cabin in the Woods, which was a thriller I just like picked up out of the blue from the library, and I really, really loved it. I actually think the writing, the pacing, the storyline, the reveals, like everything was done so well in this book, which is not always the case in thrillers, especially ones that you randomly pick up you've never heard of. So then I started a series that I ended up absolutely loving, which is the Lunar Chronicles series. So that is Cinder, Scarlet, Cress, and Midwinter. Absolutely loved it. Fairy tale retellings. She did such a good job blending in the fairy tale aspects with her own ideas and plot lines and putting it all together, and it was so, so good. And then I read All This Time, which was a YA coming of age romance, and it really went all over the place. Like I was like, I don't like it. Oh wait, I like it. Oh wait, I don't like it again. And then I read Counting the Cost, which was a very eye-opening memoir about the Duggars, which is like the 19 Kids and Counting family. I feel like I learned a lot about reality television and also like growing up super Christian. It was very fascinating to read. And then I read Craven Manor. I always read one of Darcy Coates' horror books every year, and this one was one of my favorite, like plotline wise. Like I really enjoyed the plot, but it was not scary at all. And then I read Kiss Curse, which is the sequel to The Ex-Hex. I really, really love how cozy this world is. It's like Stars Hollow and Halloween Town, and it's like witchy and cozy and romantic and fits the vibes perfectly, but it's kind of all vibes and there's nothing else to it. But sometimes that's exactly what you want. And then I read Pumpkin Spice Cafe, which, you know, if I wanted Gilmore Girls, I would just watch Gilmore Girls. I don't need a fanfic of it. This book had all the right ingredients, but put it all together wrong, and I did not like it. And then I read Halloween Party by Agatha Christie, and I was kind of let down by it because I read other books by her that I really liked, and this one just wasn't very good, but it was also one of the last books she wrote, so I think she just had like kind of gone downhill and was having like problems with dementia. It wasn't bad, but it just wasn't as good as her other ones. And then I read The Inheritance Games, and I really, really liked it. I can't wait to read more of this series. It was just like Knives Out, but with teenagers. It was so fun. And then I read Sterling House, which I was kind of surprised. It reminded me of Mexican Gothic, but like I didn't like that book, and I love this book. It was very fun Gothic vibes with a little bit of fantasy, and honestly the fantasy part kind of confused me, but the Gothic vibes were great. And then I read the Me Before You trilogy, which is Me Before You, After You, and Still Me. This is such a beautiful series, so real and raw and beautiful, and I love the main character, but you should look up trigger warnings for the first book. And then I read All the Bright Places, and I was very disappointed. I know what the author was trying to do, and I feel like she did not do a good job. And then I read Dark Things I Adore. I really enjoyed the dark parts of the book. I didn't really like the academic part, which is funny because I literally went to art school and have a degree in art, and I just didn't care for that part of the book at all. But I do think I'll give the genre dark academia another chance. And then I read The Getaway List, which is another YA coming of age book. I hadn't read one in a long time at this point, so I actually really enjoyed this one. It was pretty fun. Of course, it was unrealistic, but I don't really have anything else to complain about this one, actually. I tend to like the books this author writes. And then I reread Iron Flame in preparation for Onyx Storm coming out in January, so very soon. And I liked it. Now that I know the reveal that happens at the end, reading it again and knowing that was like... And then I read Heartstopper. I'm so excited that I finally started this series because I absolutely loved it. It was so cute. I was literally giggling. I'm so excited to continue it. And then I read the Quishmish. Then I read The Christmas Swap and was very, very disappointed because it was just so stiff and robotic and not Christmassy and not romantic and not fun. And then I read Love in Other Words, which I really, really loved while I was reading it, but then the reveal at the end ruined it for me. Like, ruined it a lot for me, and I don't know how I feel about the couple anymore. And this is the year I got into reading manga, so I read 12 volumes of the One Piece manga. I started these in June, I think, and I read 12, and I wanted to read more than that, but I just never got around to it. And so... quickly, so the names of these are Romance Dawn, Buggy the Clown, Don't Get Fooled Again, Black Cat Pirate, For Whom the Bell Tolls, The Oath, The Crap Geezer, I Won't Die, Tears, Okay, Let's Stand Up, The Meanest Man in the East, and The Legend Begins. I find this series very, very fun, and I really, really love the main character. He is so funny and has such a big heart, and I can't wait to continue the series. So I think those are all 118 books that I read this year, and while going through the list to put it together, I realized I kind of forgot I read a lot of them this year, which is crazy. It's so weird to think like, oh, I read that book this year. So weird how far away, but also close the beginning of the year feels. Like I'm like, oh my god, it's already December, but it's also like the books I read in January feel like a lifetime ago. It's just like so crazy to think about time and how it moves. But yeah, so those are all the books I read this year. I think you can tell which ones are my favorite, but I will have another video that lists all my favorites. And yeah, let me know what favorite books you read this year or what books you really didn't like this year, because I would love to know. And yeah, thank you for watching. Maybe you'll watch more of my videos. I read some of these in vlogs, which might be fun to watch. And yeah, bye.